My daughter needed a kidney, and I offered to be tested as a donor without a second thought, the way any father would for his child. The transplant coordinator called 3 days later, her voice careful and measured in a way that immediately told me something was wrong. Before she said the words that ended the marriage I believed was solid for 14 years. I wasn't a genetic match, and according to the specific testing protocol they used, I wasn't genetically related to my daughter at all. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of the 12 years I spent raising a daughter I loved with everything in me, only to learn, during what should have been simply an act of trying to save her life, that my wife had known, since before our daughter was even born, that she wasn't biologically mine. I want to explain what my marriage to Rebecca looked like before this discovery, because I think understanding the depth of my trust in our relationship matters to understanding just how completely this revelation upended my entire adult life. Rebecca and I met in graduate school, married 2 years later, and had our daughter, Mia, roughly 18 months into our marriage. I want to be clear that I have no memory, throughout our entire relationship leading up to Mia's conception, of any specific reason to doubt her fidelity or the biological certainty of Mia's parentage. We'd been trying to conceive for several months before Mia was born, a period I remembered, throughout the following 12 years, as a genuinely hopeful, connected time in our marriage, not one shadowed by any suspicion or distance that might now, in hindsight, explain what I eventually learned. I remember, specifically, the day Mia was born, holding her for the first time in that hospital room, feeling an overwhelming, immediate love that I never once, in 12 years, associated with anything other than absolute, uncomplicated paternal certainty. I remember pointing out, to anyone who would listen during those early months, how she had my mother's exact eye shape, a detail I now understand was almost certainly coincidental, but that felt, at the time, like genuine confirmation of a biological connection I had no reason whatsoever to question. Mia was diagnosed with a rare kidney condition roughly 2 years ago, a progressive disease that, after an extended period of medical management, eventually reached the point where her nephrologist explained that a transplant would likely become necessary within the following year. I want to describe the specific, immediate instinct I felt upon receiving this diagnosis, understanding, without a single moment of hesitation, that I would do whatever was medically possible to help my daughter, including offering myself as a potential living donor the moment this option was raised as viable. I underwent preliminary compatibility testing roughly 3 months before that devastating phone call from the transplant coordinator, a straightforward blood draw and tissue typing process that I approached with the same instinctive, uncomplicated commitment I brought to every other aspect of Mia's medical crisis throughout the preceding 2 years. I want to describe the specific, disorienting quality of that phone call, sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot when the coordinator's number appeared on my phone, expecting simply to hear whether I was compatible or not, entirely unprepared for what she actually needed to tell me. "Mr. Whitfield, I need to discuss something with you directly, and I want you to know this conversation is completely confidential," she began, her careful, measured tone immediately signaling that whatever followed would be significant. Our testing protocol includes genetic markers that establish biological relationship as part of the compatibility assessment. Based on these results, I need to inform you that you don't share a biological parent-child genetic profile with Mia. I want to try to describe the specific, vertiginous shock of hearing this information, sitting alone in my car, trying to process a statement that fundamentally contradicted 12 years of my entire understanding of my own family. My own daughter, my own life. "That's not possible," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "I've been her father since she was born. There has to be some kind of error in the testing." The coordinator, with what I understand now was genuine professional compassion for a situation she likely navigated with some regularity, gently explained that testing errors of this specific kind were extremely rare, and that if I wanted, they could arrange an independent, secondary paternity test through a completely separate laboratory to confirm the results with absolute certainty. Understanding how significant and potentially devastating this information might be for my family, I want to describe the following days, an exhausting, surreal period during which I arranged the secondary testing while somehow continuing to function normally around Rebecca and Mia, understanding that I needed absolute confirmation before initiating what I already understood would be a completely life-altering conversation with my wife. The secondary test results arrived 9 days later, definitively confirming what the transplant coordinator had originally discovered. I was not Mia's biological father. I want to describe the specific, devastating conversation I finally had with Rebecca, roughly 2 weeks after that initial phone call. Once I'd received the confirmed secondary results and could no longer continue functioning as though nothing significant had changed in my understanding of our entire family. I showed her both sets of results, laid out on our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of ordinary family dinners over 12 years, and asked her, directly, without any preamble I could manage given the magnitude of what I needed to understand, whether she had known. I remember the specific way the kitchen light fell across those printed lab results. Both of us sitting in chairs we'd occupied thousands of times before, the ordinary domesticity of the room feeling almost surreal against the weight of what we were actually discussing. I remember noticing, even amid my own devastation, how quickly Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked, unmistakably, like the specific exhaustion of someone finally setting down a burden they'd been secretly carrying for a very long time. I want to try to describe watching my wife's face during that moment, watching years of careful, sustained deception finally, visibly crack open in front of me. She didn't attempt denial. She sat down heavily across from me, and after a long, devastating silence, she said, "I need you to know I've wanted to tell you for years. I just never found a way that didn't feel like it would destroy everything." What followed was one of the most painful conversations of my entire life. Rebecca slowly, haltingly explaining a truth that had apparently existed underneath our entire marriage since before Mia was even born. Roughly 2 months before Mia's conception, during a period when Rebecca and I had been going through what I remembered, at the time, as simply an ordinary rough patch in our relationship, she had a brief affair with a former college boyfriend she'd reconnected with at a work conference. "I ended it almost immediately," she told me, during this devastating conversation. "It was barely 2 weeks, and I felt sick about it the entire time. When I found out I was pregnant, the timeline was close enough that I genuinely didn't know, at first, whether you or he was the biological father. I told myself, and I know how this sounds now, that since we were together, since you were the one raising her, the one who'd actually be her father in every way that mattered, the biology almost didn't matter." I want to try to describe the specific, layered devastation of learning that Rebecca had, in some sense, known this uncertainty existed from the very beginning of Mia's life, choosing, throughout 12 years of marriage and parenthood, never once to tell me, never to give me the choice of understanding this uncertainty myself, or pursuing testing earlier, when the stakes might have felt less catastrophically significant than they did now, arriving as they had through my daughter's genuine medical crisis. "You let me believe, for 12 years, that she was completely mine," I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to maintain some composure. "Every single moment of her life, every milestone, every middle of the night feeding when she was a baby, every time I told people how much she looked like my mother. You knew, this whole time, that there was a real chance none of that biological connection actually existed." I want to describe Rebecca's specific explanation for her sustained silence throughout those 12 years, an explanation that, while providing some context, didn't meaningfully reduce the devastating weight of the deception itself. "I was scared," she said. "I was scared that if I told you, even early on, you'd leave, that you'd resent her, that everything we'd built as a family would fall apart. And the longer I waited, the harder it became to imagine ever telling you. Because by that point you were so completely her father in every real, meaningful way, and I convinced myself that the biological truth almost didn't matter anymore, that telling you would only cause pain without actually changing anything important." I want to describe the specific, exhausting process of navigating the following months, understanding that I now faced an impossibly complex set of overlapping crises, processing profound betrayal regarding my marriage, navigating genuine, complicated grief regarding my biological relationship to Mia, while simultaneously needing to remain completely present and stable for my daughter, who remained, throughout this entire period, in the middle of a genuine, serious medical crisis requiring an eventual kidney transplant from some compatible donor. I want to be direct about something that became immediately, viscerally clear to me throughout this devastating period, something I never once genuinely doubted despite everything else being upended. My love for Mia as my daughter remained completely, entirely unchanged by this biological revelation. I want to describe the specific clarity of this understanding, arriving even amid the depths of my anger and grief regarding Rebecca's deception, a clarity that helped anchor me throughout the following months even as nearly everything else about my understanding of my own family felt genuinely unstable. I want to describe the practical medical crisis that continued unfolding alongside this devastating personal revelation, understanding that Mia still urgently needed a compatible kidney donor, a search that now needed to proceed without my own participation as a potential match, given the biological reality the initial testing had revealed. I want to describe the specific, difficult decision I faced regarding whether to pursue identifying Mia's actual biological father. Understanding this information might prove medically relevant for locating additional potential donor matches, alongside the deeper question of whether Mia herself, now 12 years old, deserved to eventually understand this aspect of her own biological history, regardless of how that information might complicate her understanding of our family. Rebecca and I ultimately decided, after extensive discussion and several sessions with a family therapist specifically to navigate this complex decision, that identifying the biological father made sense given the medical urgency involved, understanding that his family might include additional compatible donor candidates beyond what our existing extended family could provide. I want to describe the surreal, additional layer of complexity this decision introduced, watching Rebecca reach out, after 12 years of silence, to a man she'd had a brief affair with over a decade earlier, now needing to navigate an entirely unprecedented conversation about genetic testing and potential kidney donation for a daughter he had no previous knowledge existed. The biological father, a man named Christopher who Rebecca eventually located through the same college friend network that had originally reconnected them years earlier, responded to this devastating, unexpected revelation with what I understand. From Rebecca's account of their conversation, was genuine shock followed by a willingness to undergo testing himself, understanding the medical stakes involved for a daughter whose existence he'd never previously known about. Christopher, as it turned out, wasn't himself a compatible match, though his own mother, Mia's biological paternal grandmother, ultimately proved to be genetically compatible, and, after extensive additional conversations and medical evaluation, agreed to undergo the transplant surgery as Mia's donor. A decision that introduced its own complex layer of extended family relationships neither Rebecca nor I had ever anticipated needing to navigate. I want to describe the specific, surreal experience of Mia's transplant surgery, successfully performed roughly 4 months after that initial devastating phone call. With a donor kidney from a biological grandmother Mia had never previously known existed, present in the waiting room alongside Rebecca and me, a woman who was, in the most literal biological sense, more genetically connected to my daughter than I was, despite my having raised her for her entire life. I want to be honest about the complicated, ongoing process of processing my relationship with Mia throughout this entire period, understanding that even while my love for her remained completely unchanged, I found myself navigating a genuinely complex grief regarding the biological connection I'd always assumed existed, a grief that felt, at times, almost impossible to fully articulate given how completely it existed alongside continued, undiminished paternal love. I want to describe the specific, difficult conversation Rebecca and I eventually had with Mia herself, roughly 6 months after her successful transplant. Once she'd sufficiently recovered, and we'd had extensive guidance from a family therapist regarding how to approach this conversation in an age-appropriate way that honored both the biological truth and the unchanged, permanent reality of my role as her father. I want to describe watching my daughter's face as we explained this complex family history, watching her process information that fundamentally complicated her own understanding of her biological origins, while also, crucially, hearing both Rebecca and me affirm, repeatedly and clearly, that this biological reality changed nothing about my identity as her father, about the permanent, unconditional nature of my love and commitment to her. "So you're still my dad," Mia said, during this conversation, a statement that carried both a question and, I think, a need for explicit reassurance given the complexity of what she was processing. "I am completely, permanently your dad," I told her. "Nothing about this changes that, not even a little bit. I've been your father since the day you were born, and I'll be your father for the rest of my life, regardless of anything about biology." I want to describe my relationship with Rebecca in the time since this entire situation unfolded, a process that has involved extensive individual and couples therapy, genuine ongoing struggle to rebuild trust that was so completely, fundamentally violated by 12 years of sustained deception, alongside a complicated, persistent love for the family we'd built together despite everything. I want to be honest that Rebecca and I remain married, a decision that surprised some people we've shared this story with, understanding that many might expect a betrayal this significant to represent an unambiguous, immediate end to a marriage. Our decision to attempt continued reconciliation rather than divorce emerged from extensive therapy and genuine reflection regarding what actually mattered most throughout this entire crisis. Not erasing the 12 years of deception, which remains a permanent, significant wound in our relationship, but weighing that devastating breach against 12 years of otherwise genuine partnership, and against my own unconditional commitment to remaining fully present in Mia's life regardless of Whatever happened between Rebecca and me as a couple, I want to describe the specific, ongoing work our marriage has required since this all happened. Understanding that rebuilding trust after this level of sustained deception isn't a process that resolves quickly or completely, but rather requires continued, deliberate effort, extensive ongoing therapy, and Rebecca's sustained, demonstrated commitment to a transparency our marriage clearly lacked throughout its earlier years. It's been just over 18 months since that devastating phone call in the grocery store parking lot. Mia has fully recovered from her transplant, thriving as a healthy, energetic 13-year-old with no ongoing medical complications from either the original kidney condition or the surgery itself. My relationship with her remains, in every practical, emotional sense that actually matters, completely unchanged. I remain, unambiguously, her father, a role I've never once doubted despite everything else this experience upended. I've developed, since this happened, an unexpected but genuinely meaningful relationship with Christopher, Mia's biological father, and his mother, the woman whose kidney now sustains my daughter's life. We navigate a careful, evolving extended family dynamic, one none of us ever anticipated needing to build, but one that has ultimately added additional, genuine support and connection to Mia's life rather than the destabilizing complication I initially feared it might represent. I think, often, about the specific irony embedded in how this entire truth finally surfaced, not through some ordinary marital conflict or suspicion, but through my own instinctive, uncomplicated love for my daughter, offering myself as a donor without a single moment of hesitation, only to have that very act of love reveal a truth that had been carefully, deliberately hidden from me for over a decade. If you've ever discovered a fundamental truth about your family that had been deliberately concealed from you for years, forcing you to reconcile deep, unconditional love with genuine, significant betrayal, I want to hear how you navigated holding both of those realities simultaneously. I used to believe that biological parentage and deliberate deception about it represented questions with relatively clear, obvious answers regarding how a person should respond. I've learned, in the most complicated way possible, that love, once genuinely built over years of actual daily presence and commitment, doesn't simply dissolve in the face of biological truth, even when that truth arrives wrapped in a betrayal significant enough to fundamentally alter everything else about how you understood your own family and marriage.